Welcome to the MyLifeInConcert.com podcast. I'm your host, Various Artists, and please join me as I time travel back and revisit almost every live show I've ever seen from 1975 to the present. Hey everyone, your host VA here once again, and welcome to the MyLifeInConcert.com podcast. I just want to start by thanking listeners who have been tuning in to the last few podcasts. The numbers have been good. We're really pleased that people are listening and hopefully are enjoying. And today I will be concluding the 5-part intro to the series whereby as I've been seeing concerts and we'll be talking about shows I've seen over the past 5 decades, I've chosen to start by picking one show from each of the 5 decades to start with for those of you who are just hearing the series for the first time. The episode 1 was the intro. Episode 2 was my show from the 70s, the very first show I ever saw, Roxy Music here in London, Ontario in 1975, an incredible start to concert going. Jumping to the 80s, I jumped ahead 5 years, and episode 3 was the Ramones at Centennial Hall here. Fantastic show from the Ramones with local heroes, the Demics, opening. Episode 4 jumped ahead 12 years to 1992 and the height of the grunge era, and it was Lollapalooza 1992 with Red Hot Chili Peppers, Ministry, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, and Lush. And episode 5 jumped ahead to 2004, and it was the last time I saw David Bowie. Sadly, the last time, but fortunately, one of the very best times with a show in Ottawa. Today, I conclude with episode 6. Well, conclude the intro. We're just starting here. Jumping ahead 8 years to 2012, and this time at... what was it called at the time? I think it was Scotiabank Place at this point. It was the same place I saw David Bowie, and it was the one, the only Leonard Cohen. The one and only time I got to see him live, and boy, it did not disappoint. And this episode 6 is entitled, I'm Your Man. And he certainly was. Leonard Cohen at Scotiabank Place, Friday, December 7th, 2012, Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. Now, this is one show that I wrote when I was doing the initial blog, which I was writing from 2010 to 2015 and reporting on some of the shows I was seeing at the time. So this is concert number 175 in my blog series, and you can go over to the MyLifeInConcert.com blog and read the initial entry, the original entry. And actually with today, I'm going to be reading from sections of it simply because I phrased a few things there that I don't think I could improve rambling at the microphone. So a few dramatic readings along with reminiscences. And also, Cublet will be joining me today. He was up last week with his memories of the David Bowie episode, and today we'll be talking about seeing Leonard the Lizard in 2012. Now, I'll start off by tracing about where sort of I was musically after the David Bowie gig, say in 2004, and this Leonard Cohen gig in 2012. Now, a few years prior to the Bowie gig, in 2000 actually, we got two things at once, and I think I'd mentioned this before, a CD burner and Napster, and that opened up a can of worms of me spending years making all these compilations up and sort of focusing on that and grabbing all this music and adding to my library. And that kind of came to an end in late 2005 when I got my first iPod, and pretty much from there on in, a lot of things shifted to digital. Now, I'm still someone who loves buying the original hard format, and I know vinyl has been the big thing, and I bought some collector pieces, but I'm a hardcore CD guy. I don't care how uncool and out of fashion it is. I still think they sound the best, and it's the best way to have music. However, I was uploading a lot of stuff to my iPod, and that's primarily how I was listening. And then when we moved in 2006, the way the house was set up, mostly we're in the basement, which is where the stereo was to watch TV, so mostly I was playing my iPod on the speakers upstairs. However, where we are now, it's great. Everything's centralized, and we both do, but I play a lot of CDs now, and vinyl, and even cassettes. We've got the cassettes out. It's all accessible. And, of course, one other thing that came out of all this is they started releasing the 5.1 mixes, which that's something I have a real passion for. They really sound incredible. And I think that's one of the things that's really been lost. And when I was growing up, and I still feel this way, good sound was part of it, the best sound you could get. And that's totally been lost, and I think that really sucks. It's all about the convenience over quality sound. And yes, I totally get it. Sometimes convenience needs to be part of the equation in a number of situations. But when people are sitting in a room listening, on a tinny phone or through a single earbud by themselves, not to mention how bad basic iTunes earbuds sound in the first place, and that's the status quo they're fine with, no way. Seriously, why bother? Why bother? It's really sad because in my lifetime, I've witnessed audio listening standards and options jump radically forward and then seemingly to completely regress. Really sad. On the upside, of course, now there's greater access to music than ever before. And as I had talked about in previous episodes, over the decades, what I listened to, the types of music I was interested in, just grew and grew and grew. And then when I had access to all this, everything just exploded in every direction, not to mention that I now had access to pretty much everything I had ever listened to. Also, too, in Ottawa, and I had discussed this the last time, it had really become a music city. So from the perspective of live shows, the first few years I was in Ottawa in the late 90s, early 2000s, I didn't see a ton of shows, at least minimum one a year. But from about the time of David Bowie and onwards, Ottawa had really become a music city. So by this point in 2012, I was now used to seeing a lot of great people coming through the city to Blues Fest, the Jazz Festival, the Folk Festival, which then became City Folk. But it also had the domino effect of getting more people interested in music in general, and more artists overall were coming to Ottawa. Now, as for where I was personally, last time around I was mentioning that, I had started my professional career working for the government, working in a lot of bureaucratic environments that were toxic, dysfunctional, unpleasant. And at the time of the show, it was actually this weird little brief delusional uptick period, because I had almost had my job cut from government cuts that went down that were strictly done to punish civil servants, and was able to jump to something else that at this point, it was like, okay, thank heavens, I've still got a job. That whole period, if I was to redo it, I would have done a whole totally different option. But hey, live and learn, you can only do it once. And at this point, I hadn't yet realized that I had just jumped into another dysfunctional, abusive trash dump, and was still sort of on okay, things are going to be good. We have a new start here. Things are good. And this show came along. Now, I had bought the tickets earlier in the year, and they were not cheap. They were $171. And I splashed out at a time when that was a bit of a gamble because it looked like I may be losing my job and that sort of thing. But I thought, I have to see him this time around because I had missed him the last time. And I'll get back to that. There's a whole story behind that in a minute. So, in short order, things in my life within about a year went back to completely crapadoodles, even more so than ever before, but I did not know that yet at this time. So this was a happy time seeing Leonard and having such great seats in the process of doing so. Now, as for Leonard himself, well, he was coming off a pretty bad time as well. Somewhere around the mid-2000s, he had realized that he'd been ripped off by his business manager and lost most of his money, sort of like Schitt's Creek for real, minus all the great laughs. And this was one of those horrible situations that'll happen in somebody's life. The upside was it was a complete career and artistic renaissance from Cohen, and the set of circumstances pushed him in this direction. So needing the money, he had to go back out and tour, and he started his tour on May 11th, 2008 in Fredericton, New Brunswick, here in Canada. And that was at a theater, I believe, and that kicked off what ended up being this multi-year tour that just grew and grew and grew and turned him into a sensation and a star in a way that he really hadn't been before outside of Canada. So this started a period. He was on the road for several years. He actually put out the Live in London double disc that had been recorded in 2008, and that ended up being one of his biggest sellers. I know here in Canada it went triple platinum, but around the world it charted and really put him back in the public eye. This is also the period, too, where everyone started covering Hallelujah. We'll be getting back to that. And in 2012, this year when we saw him live, he had returned with his first new recording since Dear Heather in 2004 with Old Ideas, one of his very best albums, which did very well around the world. I know here in Canada it was a number one. All of his remaining albums hit number one here and was platinum, but did very well internationally and reestablished him. And it was one of his best works and kicked off an unprecedented set of 4 albums in one decade. He hadn't been this prolific since the 70s. And it's not just that he was a little more prolific. These albums are great. And we'll also talk about his sense of quality control a bit later as well. Now, in terms of him coming to Ottawa, this was a return engagement. He had come through on one of the earlier legs of the tour. And of course, this is Ottawa. He'd played here many times. And in the last podcast on David Bowie, I talked about how I really lucked out getting tickets. It's, we all do it online these days. It's been that way for a while. There's a process if you're a hardcore concert goer and try to get the good tickets. And it's that thing, you go in, you set up the different browsers, you start refreshing as the time comes soon. And in the Bowie episode last week, I talked about how it's the one and only time I've ever had tickets go on sale early, and it worked out to my advantage. Several years later, by the time we're hitting the 2010s, this is where I find bots start being really intrusive. They really start buying up a lot of the best tickets. It wasn't that it wasn't there before, but I feel the problem with bots stopping people from having a fair shot at seats is something that went nuts in the last decade. And the first set of Cohen shows in Ottawa in, I think it was 2010, are a perfect example of that. Now, I don't know why most of the shows he was playing by that point were in very large places. And when the show came through Ottawa, he instead opted to play 2 nights at the NAC. Now, the NAC is the National Arts Center, and the main hall is the Opera Hall, and that's where he was performing. And it's just a fantastic place, beautiful. We'll be getting to that later. I see a lot of shows there. Great acoustics. And it's a fairly intimate hall, like it's 3,000 people. I think it's 3,000, so it's not tiny, but it's not an arena or a stadium. And he was playing usually these large arenas. So he opted for 2 nights, which in terms of intimacy was incredible. But I was there. The tickets went on sale at 10. I put in 2 tickets. I got in immediately. And there were not any 2 tickets together in the entire venue. Now, of course, there had been pre-ticket sales, but this is ridiculous. And then I put it in again. I thought, well, I'm not paying a pile of money for us to sit in completely different parts of the NAC. Put it in again. Tickets were gone. Literally, they were sold out in a minute. And it's like, this is insane. And I was very, very angry because, here it is. Okay, Cohen's not going to come through after this. He's probably doing this tour. He's extending it. And then it's going to be, see you later. I'm off to sit by the sea or whatever. As with a lot of people, I wasn't expecting the whole artistic rebirth that just kept continuing through the decade. So when this show was announced, it was, and it was happening just as everything was falling apart with work and money and all that. I thought, I have to. I'm splashing out. I got the tickets. This time I was lucky. I got through reasonably. I got through early. I think I even got in on the advanced sales this time. I had started to figure that out. Anyway, we were 13th row, so we were about the same amount of space from the stage as when we saw David Bowie. And again, that's the way to see a show. Now, as for my history with being a Cohen fan, certainly growing up in Canada, you knew who Cohen was. Even when I was younger in the 70s, he was seen as a national treasure because, of course, he'd been publishing books here since Let Us Compare Mythologies, his first poetry book in 1956. And he'd been acclaimed internationally, but he had always been known here to some degree And certainly with his music career taking off, he became very well known. And the song I knew was Suzanne. That's one I would hear on the radio. And I maybe knew of a few of his other songs, but I wouldn't say that I was overly familiar with his work in the 70s. I'd say that I knew some of it. I liked him. I certainly respected him as a songwriter. And then sort of in the latter part of the decade, and then punk came in, and a lot of the older acts I wasn't listening to as much, and I kind of sort of went through that period there. Maybe I wasn't listening, but again in the 80s, that's when I really went back to a rediscovery of things. It's in the 80s, especially around the time of the release of Various Positions in late 1984. I think that's when I really started to explore his work more seriously. I know that for a number of people my age, that period in that album, because I think a lot of us were kind of going back to some of the older artists. I know here in Canada that was a very popular album, and Much Music had just started, and they immediately put the video for Dance Me to the End of Love in high rotation upon release. And so that beautiful, haunting black and white video for the song was flashing on our screens daily. And so he had a career and media resurgence here in Canada like he hadn't in a decade. And so around this time, he began reestablishing himself in the mainstream here. And pretty much from that point onwards, he has been a star here. He's really been well known. I'm Your Man capitalized on that, and we'll get to there in a moment. But I think it was around this time that I really started listening to his work. I bought The Best of Leonard Cohen, and on my radio show, which I'd started on CHRW Radio Western, I did from 84 to 92. And at that point, I started playing a lot of Cohen on my show. And that's also a way that I became more exposed to his work. Also, my brother-in-law had some of his albums. So bit by bit, I was starting to explore his back catalog and what he was doing and getting into it more and more. Now, he followed it with I'm Your Man, which also did really well here. And I was working in a record store by that point, and that's one of those albums like it just sold and sold for about 2 years. And you could really see that his audience was rebuilding. And that was kind of a slow build that just kept going and going. And you were always selling The Best of Leonard Cohen, and his back catalog started going. So it just built and built. Now, with I'm Your Man, it's interesting. When that came out in 88, for some reason, I wasn't that keen on it. I just didn't think it worked. And I wasn't overly fond of it at the time. And it's one of those albums that went from that to slowly engaging me over the years to, at some point, I don't know when, maybe 20 years ago, it became my favorite Leonard Cohen album. It flipped. It's my favorite now. I think it's the one that works best. It's his best collection of songs. But it took me a while for sort of my ears to really get around it and get into it. And of course, the next one was The Future in 1992, which did well for him internationally. But in Canada, that was kind of his thriller album, as it were. It was a huge success. Actually, I looked online. I was surprised to find out that the album only went double platinum. I thought that would have been one of those 4-time platinum albums here. Perhaps maybe in southwestern Ontario or southern Ontario, it was even more concentrated, but that's kind of one of those albums. I was at the store. It was a big seller. You heard it everywhere you went. It seems everyone I knew had it. It's just kind of one of those albums that, at least up here, saturated the culture, and certainly around the world, re-expanded this audience. Now, for myself, there's a lot of appeal in his music. First off, he wrote a lot of great melodies, which I don't think he gets as much credit for as he should. Some of his songs are so deceptively catchy and simple, but they really draw you in. But certainly the lyrics is what he's known for as well, or predominantly. And as someone who was an English major and very much into writing and words, I think he's one of the best songwriters ever. And there is the dark side to a lot of what he's writing as well, and that's something I'm drawn to as well, and sort of the beauty and the sadness, the beauty and the darkness. And it can be cathartic in the same way that even something like really raw, aggressive music can be cathartic. In episode 3, I was talking about Soundgarden, and sort of around the same time period we're talking about, end of 80s, early 90s, I was also listening to a lot of very loud, aggressive guitar rock, and that's very cathartic. Cohen can be cathartic and comforting in its own way as well. One thing that comes to mind is when we moved back here, and it was, this will be all be coming up, is life really fell apart in the middle of the decade. Not between my partner and I, but everything around us. And it was a move back. And late 2016, early 2017 was a particularly dark time in my life. And I remember there was this one period, these few really crappy days, the only album that I could bear to listen to that made sense to me was Leonard Cohen's Songs of Love and Hate, which is one of his absolute best. Top of the line album, but when Songs of Love and Hate is really the only thing you can really listen to and the only thing that really makes sense, your life is not in a good place. I mean, it just starts with Avalanche and it goes from there. I mean, one of his best albums, if you're looking to explore his back catalog, I'm Your Man and Songs of Love and Hate, those would be two to start with. But definitely, it's certainly not How Much Is That Doggy in the Window, if that's maybe the kind of vibe you're going for on that particular day. And hey, props to Patty Page as well. And indeed, through the years, for some, the name Leonard Cohen is pretty much synonymous with sadness and misery. I guess it's all from a perspective. One thing that comes to mind for me is I'd mentioned I had a radio show for 8 years, every Friday morning in London, Ontario, CHRW. And from 11 till noon on Friday morning, my show mostly was on Friday from 9 till noon. And in that last hour, I always did a feature on an artist where I would discuss their career, their life, play tracks from throughout their career, that sort of thing. And I did one on Leonard Cohen one morning, and this would have been mid-'80s, like 85, 86, 87. And I got 2 calls during my show. The first one was somebody phoning up saying, "You are making my morning. I'm such a Leonard Cohen fan. I'm at work. I have the radio on. This is just completely doing it for me. Thank you for playing all this music. And this is just wonderful. Thanks." And then I hung the phone up, and about 5 minutes later, I got another call, and it was like, "What are you trying to do to us? It's not even noon yet. I feel like I'm going to kill myself if this goes on." And I just said, "Well, it was nice talking to you," and hung up. But there you have it right there. He can be a polarizing figure. I guess it just depends on your perspective, but I truly believe he's one of the best songwriters ever. And with his voice, again, I love his voice. Well, in the early days he was singing, but it's more of a sort of a talk singing mixture. Lou Reed, Tom Waits, I love those kinds of voices. There's character, there's expression, there's delivery. It's not so much about hitting all the notes. It's about character, who they are, delivery, engagement, having an instrument that may not be note perfect, but is instead unique and has a character. Now, here's one thing for me. Yes, he can be dark and gloomy, but there's often a lot of humor at work in a lot of these tunes. And his dark humor, that seems to get missed, even from seeing him live, but even in his lyrics, even in some of his songs. For example, Exhibit A from Is This What You Wanted from New Skin for the Old Ceremony. Another of his very best albums. Sample lyric, "You were Marlon Brando, I was Steve McQueen. You were KY Jelly, I was Vaseline." That always puts a smile on my face. And on his then recent album, Old Ideas, there was the line in Anyhow that just kills me every time I hear it. "I know you have to hate me, but could you hate me less?" And of course, the opening lyric on the album from the song Going Home, "I love to speak with Leonard. He's a sportsman and a shepherd. He's a lazy bastard living in a suit." So let's give him some props here. He did have his Phyllis Diller moments. Another thing he had was a high standard of quality. I don't know what kind of contract he finagled when he signed with Columbia in 1967, but it must have been a sweet one, because from what I've seen is essentially Leonard Cohen only put albums out when he felt he had the material to do it, or the desire, the need. He wasn't someone whose catalog was harmed by being on this production line treadmill where he was churning out an album every few months. It's rare for an artist to get that kind of freedom, but obviously he had it. And the result is, and of course this is all a matter of opinion, but out of the 15 studio albums he recorded between 1967 and Thanks for the Dance, issued in 2019, but begun before he died in 2016, I think out of that 15, there's only one dud in the bunch, and that's Death of a Ladies' Man. Even that has its moments, and even Cohen himself didn't want that album released. So consequently, he had this career where there were times where there was big gaps of no new music, but he's one of those artists, one of those rare artists, who had a 50-year span on his recordings, and as I said, I only think there's one dud in the bunch, and even the dud has its moments. It's extremely rare to find an artist who recorded for that long and who didn't go through like a crap period, or there's some real duds in there. And I think it's just because it was about quality and him not being forced to just put out product. So for those getting into Leonard Cohen maybe later on, and wondering what albums to start with, well, definitely there's some that are better than others, but there's really no crap in there, except for the one I mentioned. They're all good. And even with Death of a Ladies' Man, I mean, hey, you buy it and you get to hear Bob Dylan and Allen Ginsberg sing backup on Don't Go Home With Your Heart On, but otherwise, leave that one till last. It's an album he did with Phil Spector, and it was, Phil and guns and craziness. And anyway, the album, Spector did so much great music, but this is after that period, and this one really doesn't work. It's a match that really doesn't meld, and Cohen knew it. Now, the one thing that's really interesting about this, and I only found this out last year, is he recorded most of an album after New Skin for the Old Ceremony and before Death of a Ladies' Man, and it's never been issued. And I found out about this in a fantastic documentary that was released last year, Marianne and Leonard. I cannot recommend it enough. And it's mostly about his off-and-on relationship with Marianne, who he wrote many songs about, So Long Marianne and Bird on a Wire, when they were both living on the island of Hydra in Greece during the 1960s. And the whole milieu that he was operating in, this bohemian enclave, is absolutely fascinating. And you really get this whole other sense of Cohen and his life, and really fascinating. Holy shit, did he ever do a lot of acid? Like, wow. Oh, wow. Anyway, but it's a great documentary, but that's where I found out about this album that is online. So you can actually go and find the recording, and hopefully that'll officially see the light of day sometime. So in the 90s, he had the big success with The Future, and then after that, retreated from all of it. Became a Buddhist monk in L.A., but eventually returned in 2001 with 10 new songs. A very, very strong album again. It's another personal favorite of mine. And again, another top 10 hit for him here. Now, he followed it a few years later with kind of similar, but a bit slighter, Dear Heather in 2004. With some spoken word pieces, which was kind of new for him as well, but made sense. It was kind of around this point and onwards that I really became more of a mega fan. As I said, I knew his work in the 70s. I discovered it in the 80s, but I think from that period in the mid-80s to kind of the start of the century was a simmering period where I got into his music more and more, and then it just boiled over somewhere around the turn of the century, and now I have everything he's ever done, and I became sort of a super fan. So this worked out well when he came back from his bad situation and re-engaged with his art and performing and then releasing music. This time I was particularly primed to enjoy and appreciate it, but had the whole history of his career, which I had now taken in. Now, as for the show itself, as I said, it was a Friday night. It had been a rough year. Things looked like they were really turning around. So there was this sense of occasion of going out, and yes, we're going to have this great evening and have these great seats. And went all the way out to, was it the Corral Center at the time? It's the big place out in Canada. Canada is a neighborhood in the far, far west end of the National Capital Region, of which Ottawa is the center. And a lot of the big shows were out at this place that held about 18,000, I think, when capacity. And there's a whole pile of shows coming up down the road there. So we got in there, we got seated, and my memories of the stage, first off, was how close we were yet again. As with David Bowie in episode 5, it's like, oh, wow, he's just there. We're so close. Another thing that really stands out in my mind is, okay, I'm now doing this. When I'm recording this, I'm 57. At the time of the show, I was about to turn 50 a week later. So on one hand, I'm used to going to shows and being one of the older ones there, although one of the things that certainly I've noticed through the years is when I was younger, if you would have seen people my age at a show, they would have been in small numbers. That's just not the case for people who grow up going to shows and going to these, going to see live music and being at shows, because I go to shows of all different kinds these days, and I notice that everyone kind of comes out. Of course, it tends to skew maybe one way or another because of an act, and this would be an example, because still, regardless, I'm used to going and being one of the older people at the shows. This was one of these shows where I still felt like I was one of the young'uns, one of the spring chickens, and that doesn't happen often anymore. And I also remember being seated, and his roadies were on stage setting everything up, and it was great. Even the roadies were in suits and fedoras, which visually and aesthetically worked really well. I'm thinking that must have really sucked to be one of the roadies, because that must have been very hot and uncomfortable to work in. But hey, guys, visually, it was amazing. Also, I bought a program, and one of the things that killed me is in the middle of the program, sort of on these wax sheets, were a pile of Leonard Cohen stickers. So stickers of Leonard and things to do with his music that you could put on things. I just thought that was hilarious. I love the dark humor involved in that. And I've actually got pictures of that up on the mylifeinconcert.com blog entry for this show. I also have a picture of some Cohen artwork that was on the screen, and this is a really funny story from that night. This is one of the things I always remember, and with this series, it's kind of what I'm accentuating. You always remember these small little moments that you associate with these events. And so anyway, we're up close, and I'm sitting next to this older Ottawa couple. And I'm sitting next to the lady, and nice as can be. Lovely sitting next to her. Very, very sweet. Very Ottawa. If you've been to Ottawa or know Ottawa, or I think it's the case with a lot of government capitals that aren't also cultural capitals, there really is a coldness and there's a roboticism to the place. And she was very sweet, but very, very Ottawa. Very officious, very polite, but just so. But anyway, rather than sitting next to a buffoon, I was sitting next to this very nice woman. And I was going through my program, and she was asking about different things. And there was this one page with all these albums. So she was asking me which ones, I liked. And for us, it was like, okay, a night out, we're seeing the show. We're actually one of the pups here. And there was a lot of people there where I think going out to this huge stadium shed thing in Canada was probably sort of downscale for them or whatever. And I think she was trying to keep up this very sort of Ottawa lady look and project the right respectable image. And so up on the screen, while we're waiting for Cohen to come on, we're having this chat, there's this artwork that he's done, and it's of Lady Godiva and her horse, and it's from, say, the waist up, and it's a line drawing. So of course Lady Godiva's naked, so it's a topless Lady Godiva and a horse with some paint. And so I'd sort of pause from talking to this woman, and I'm looking through it, and then all of a sudden I hear her husband go, "Hey, look, she's got her titties out." And I'm trying to stifle hysterical laughter. And from her general direction, I heard this kind of sound, kind of like a wounded animal, sort of like, and right away, because you're sitting close to someone, you could feel the jiggling force of the elbow going back into her husband. And anyway, it's really, really funny. And he kept his mouth shut from that point onwards, I noticed. And then when the band did come on, one of the things that we have to discuss is his band. His band were absolutely incredible. And the musicians that night were Roscoe Beck, who had played with him for quite a while, was the musical director. Sharon Robinson, of course, she was a vocalist, but they had written many songs together, and I believe she co-produced 10 new songs as well. So she's been a very, very close collaborator in the last few decades of his career. Raphael Gayol, drums and percussion. Neil Larson on keyboards and accordion. Mitch Watkins on guitar. Javier Ma on loud, bandurria, and guitar. Actually, his playing during the evening, he's the musician that sticks in my mind from the evening, and a lot of his playing and his flourishes really added a lot of tasty flavors to the music of the evening. And then there was Alexandru Bublici, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, on violin, who also stands out in my mind. The loud, the violin, those were some of the sounds that I really recall. And Mitch Scoble playing harmonica. And also, too, the Webb sisters who sang with him, Charlie and Hattie. And Sharon and the sisters had songs of their own during the evening. Now, the thing with each of them getting their own song, the Webb sisters did If It Be Your Will, but Sharon Robinson did a solo version of Alexandra Leaving. Now, that's a song they wrote together, and she did a great job. She's got a beautiful voice. It's just, it's a big favorite of mine. It's one of my favorite Cohen tunes, and I just would love to have heard Cohen sing it himself. But, Sharon, you did a good job. In terms of what I remember from the gig, now at this time I had started writing my blog on Open Salon, which I discussed in the introductory episode, which was an offshoot of salon.com. So, and in terms of what I have to say about the show, to be honest with you, I don't think I can improve what I wrote in the initial 2012 blog entry. This is just part of it, and so I'll begin. 8 p.m. showtime was soon approaching when an announcement came over the PA informing us that there would be a 10-minute delay. Maybe he can't find his hat, reckoned another wise guy who was close to us. But in short order, there he was, running out onto the stage like the Bionic Man, falling athletically to his knees, greeted by a wildly enthusiastic, arena-wide standing ovation. He just came out, got on his knees, and slid right across. I'm just going, wow. So he was in incredible shape at this point in his life. He opened the evening with various positions, Dance Me to the End of Love, the song that kick-started his commercial reemergence and introduced him to a new generation of fans, at least here in Canada, which I was discussing earlier. That velvet subterranean growl washed through the arena like a warm wave over sand as his exceptional band played up the song's klezmer Grecian flavors. We're going to give you everything we've got tonight, said Wee Len, and that wasn't false advertising, as he 180'd from the doomy romance of dance to the smarty pants nihilism of Everybody Knows and the Future. In between simply being mesmerizing at every turn and filling the atmosphere with his purring croon, LC was also a regular chatterbox between the songs, thanking those of us for sitting near the front, for putting yourself out of pocket for the seats down here, and to those in the bleachers for climbing up the stairs. He was full of good humor and self-deprecating wit, such as when he noticed that sometimes I stumble out of bed, look in the mirror, and say to myself, "For Christ's sake, Leonard, lighten up," triggering audience-wide mirth. It's hard to explain exactly or pinpoint how, but Cohen made this gig in this voluminous home of the Senators seem warmly intimate. And okay, so I was up close and personal and we were yards away, but I don't think that was the whole reason why. It's what he radiated and how. It's a gift, and he had it. And while, yes, it's a gift, it's also a skill, because at the time there wasn't a single moment of the evening that even remotely felt phoned in, with every lyric delivered with conviction and every morsel of stage patter feeling as if he was saying it to us for the very first time. I was really surprised because after the show I went out and picked up the Live in London CD. I didn't have it prior to seeing the show. And I was kind of surprised, put on the CD, and discovered that he had more or less played the very same show and set that he'd traversed around the globe, right down to much of the same stage pattern that punctuated this Ottawa gig. He clearly rolled this out so many times, but you'd never have known it. He was completely present and was totally into it. It felt natural. Now, he took an intermission at the midway point. I think I have filmed somewhere that we filmed inside the arena during an intermission. If I can find that, I'll put it up. And so when he came back on, he noted, "So pleased that you didn't go home. So pleased that I didn't go home. I'm just 2 hours down the road from a good bagel," referring to his birthplace of Montreal, where he still maintains a residence, or did at that time. So he kicked off round two, flanked by backing vocalist Sharon Robinson and the Webb Sisters, and cranked up the Casio Tone-esque keyboard that he had and delved into Tower of Song, which is probably my favorite Leonard Cohen track. He tickled the electronic ivories, garnering audience cheers for the lines about how "I was born like this, I had no choice. I was born with the gift of a golden voice." And when he went into those deep notes, you could feel the entire arena rumble. The set skewed towards the second half of his career, which I mark as beginning with 1984's Various Positions, and tonight included numbers from the future, 10 new songs, and old ideas. Now, plenty of old favorites from his earlier, more acoustic-based masterpieces dropped by as well. Suzanne, Bird on the Wire, Famous Blue Raincoat, and Who by Fire, among others. I was particularly pleased when the familiar strumming for So Long Marianne launched the first set of encores, with the whole arena singing along with the chorus. I don't know why in retrospect, but I didn't expect it to be part of the evening, but I was really glad it was. That's one of the several big highlights that sticks in my mind, especially everyone singing along. A hair on the back of your neck standing up moment. Now, this second set also contained a surprise that particularly delighted the Francophone contingent in attendance here, in the strongly bilingual trans-province twin cities of Ottawa-Gatineau. Georges Dos, La Manique, a landmark Quebecois hit of the 1960s. And I remember my language teacher, Mark, if you're out there, at the time of this show telling him about this, and he explained the significance of this song and that it was a very important song to Quebecois sort of pop culture in the 60s. So it was neat to get the background on it, and it was neat to see him do that because I believe he only performed that at that show and in Montreal, and the Montreal version I know is on a live album that he put out later. So again, it's always neat when you can get a song at a show that's unique that maybe not everyone else on the tour is hearing. And of course, because this was Ottawa, it got a big response. Now, of course, there's one song we haven't really talked about here, and I'll go into this now, and again, I'm reading from the blog. As the second half of the main set hit the home stretch, it was inevitable that a certain tune would enter as the belle of the ball. It seems there's always been that one Cohen song that's always resided in his tower's penthouse via a predominant cultural currency at any given time. A particular song that even non-fans would know, often via other artists covering his material. Now, as I said earlier, in the late 60s and 70s, it was definitely Suzanne, and of course Judy Collins had covered that in the 60s and introduced Cohen to live performance. It's interesting because as an author, he had struggled for many years as a poet and even with acclaimed books like Beautiful Losers. But as a recording artist, he pretty much had instant fame because Collins had established an audience for the song. He was taken on by Columbia, and so musically he was always just there. Now, in the mid-'80s, it was Ain't No Cure for Love via Jennifer Warren's hit version from her popular Cohen tribute album, Famous Blue Raincoat, which again, that's an album that reintroduced Cohen in the mid-'80s to a lot of people, had done well around the world, and here again in Canada, that was a big hit, a big hit. It's kind of one of those albums that seems everyone had it. And then during the late 80s and early 90s, seemingly everyone and their grandmother was covering Bird on a Wire. Here in Canada, Of course, closing times seemed to waft from everywhere during the early 90s, but somewhere along that line, Hallelujah from Various Positions have sort of become the song. It's incrementally become the most celebrated composition of all from his catalog, with Katie Lang's take on it probably my favorite. And of course, she did that very memorable version at the 2010 Olympics. And actually, its cultural ubiquitousness may be getting a bit much. I don't know. It's a great tune. Actually, the original version on Various Positions, because Various Positions, admittedly, the production, it's not my favorite. There's things I change about it. It seems a bit overdone. So the simpler covers that were really based on John Cale's version for the I'm Your Fan tribute CD in 1990. That's a good CD as well. And again, that introduced him to a lot of people in the alternative audience. So, of course, it was eventually performed and got a big response of the night. But it's one of those songs, I love it, but there's other Cohen songs that I certainly love much more. And then at the end of it, he danced off the stage, literally. And if you go to the blog, mylifeinconcert.com, I've got a picture that I snapped of him just as he's skipping off from behind. It's kind of blurred, but you get to see him doing his little dance as he left the stage. It was very sweet. Before running right back on, and he did a series of encores that effectively served as an 8-song third set to the evening. The show was almost 3 hours. So this home stretch included some of the night's best moments. I talked about So Long, Marianne. He did a pulsating First We Take Manhattan. Oh, that was another great moment. It had the arena on its feet and clapping, and a really compelling Famous Blue Raincoat, and a very celebratory closing time. And then, just as we thought it's over, he comes racing back and sings I Tried to Leave You from No Skin for the Old Ceremony. So it's great, but it's really hilarious. I tried to leave you, I don't deny. I closed the book on us at least 100 times, which of course is pretty dark in its original tune, but in this context, the whole arena was just killing themselves laughing. Before ending the night, finally, with a cover of the Drifters' Save the Last Dance for Me. Just fantastic ending to an evening. And then, as if waking from a dream, he was gone, the house lights raising to break the spell like a Bergman-esque fade to white. He'd play for 3 hours and 15 minutes, not including the intermission. It was a transportive evening. As you'll hear in this upcoming series or read on the blog, I've seen a lot of really incredible performances through the years, but this really was one of the most special and one of the very best. He was one of those artists where the reality is you just had to see him live and be in his presence to truly understand that alchemical magic of having him live in the flesh before you. Just the gifted charisma with depth and humor. It's a show I'll never forget. And Cublet actually wasn't a major Cohen fan prior to the concert, but concurred wholeheartedly. This was one of the very best shows he's ever seen. So now I'm going to bring Cublet into the equation and have him discuss the evening, his memories, his reflections, and hello, Cublet.
Oh, hello there.
Now, you shared your memories in episode 5 of the David Bowie show that we saw in the same venue with a different name. And you came along to the Leonard Cohen show with me in 2012 that we're talking about today. Now, you would have heard me playing him around where we were living from time to time. But overall, what did you know about Leonard Cohen sort of going in, and what was your past knowledge of Leonard Cohen and his music and that sort of thing?
Well, I guess for myself, my real exposure to his music was through that album that came out, the famous Blue Raincoat.
Yes, Jennifer Warren's.
Yeah, and those were the songs I became familiar with. And then after hearing that album, I got a little curious, and so I kind of just went listen to some of his actual music, and I kind of learned more about him that way. But it was really that album that was really my introduction to him.
And I was saying earlier in another part of the podcast that album indeed introduced him to a whole new audience, particularly here in Canada, where it was a big hit, and her version of First We Take Manhattan was a hit single here. So you were part of a wave that learned of him through that album, and it's a great album.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of your memories of the night of this show, is there anything that jumps out at you? What is it that you remember from the concert?
Well, the one thing I definitely remember was, again, similar to the seating that we had at the David Bowie show, again, was the really good sight lines that we had. How close we were to the stage, and just how we had a really unobscured view of everything. That was one thing. The other thing I'd have to say as well was just the performance itself and the energy that this man had. He was just going on and on and on, and it was, and the set was amazing. The music was incredible. The backup singers, just the whole performance was great. But I guess for myself, it was just how much energy this man had.
Yeah, his endurance and his virility on the stage was just like, wow, because he never let the energy flag. It's not like he was jumping up and down doing guitar solos, but he was on stage for 3 hours. And, you're the focal point for 3 hours, and it was incredible. And he came onto the beginning and slid onto the stage, and then he did that little dance when he was leaving at the main.
Yeah, I do remember the dance. I do remember the dance. I also remember the wit, like just his comments he was making throughout the show.
Yeah, it was. You had people laughing through big chunks of it.
Yeah, it was like a real connection to the audience.
Oh no, absolutely, and everyone was so involved in the show. For me, one of the things I take away from that evening is pretty much from the moment he came on, the whole time he was on the stage, the outside world ceased to exist. Everyone was so engrossed in what was going on.
Yeah, it was almost like having Leonard in your living room.
Yeah, well, particularly for us, we were close enough. But he does have that ability to make things intimate. So going in, you were saying you weren't a huge fan, yet you would say this is one of your best concerts. Is that true?
Oh yes, absolutely. And I would rank it up there, probably one of the top 5 concerts I've seen ever. Really, it was just the length of the performance, and it was just like a really, 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 really good night.
Absolutely, I agree. And I've seen a lot of shows. One of the best I've ever seen. Just incredible. Totally worth the money.
Oh, for sure. The other thing I also took away from the show as well was just, this is a person whose career has spanned so many decades. And the age of the crowd, too, was interesting, too, because it was a fairly older demographic, but there was a mix of ages in the audience as well, too. Is just the fact that how this person, how his music really has kind of crossed the decades in a way.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you see that. I know that, well, I won't go see Dylan anymore because I think he's terrible as a performer, but I've seen him many times, and that's what hits me about his gigs. You have everyone there from 17 to 70 who are there. Mm-hmm. So he's got this generation that keeps coming up and finding him.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Cublet, for stopping by once again and sharing your memories.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
And you'll be coming up again later down the line when we kind of hit that point, or I jump ahead to some episodes of some shows you may have been at. But thanks once again.
Oh, not a problem. I appreciate it.
And there you have it. An evening that had great promise and delivered on all fronts. And we were really lucky we went. I'm glad I splashed out for the tickets because that really was it. That was his last round in North America. He went back over to Europe, did another round, and then took a few years off. And then unfortunately his health deteriorated. But he put out a new album, Popular Problems. And this is someone who wasn't putting out an album for a decade or would go years in between, and was preparing another album that came out in the fall of 2016 that his son produced called You Want It Darker. Now, I had really loved Old Ideas, and still do, when it came out in 2012. And Popular Problems, which has a great title, is good. Not quite as good as the other two, but You Want It Darker is, I think, one of his very best albums. I chose it as one of the best albums of the decade. And I had just bought it and was starting to get into it when Cohen died. And this is coming from the same year where Bowie had died in January, after I had spent the previous 3 days playing Black Star over and over. I had just started to listened to the Cohen album and was actually about to put it on when Cublet told me the news. He was on his phone reading headlines, and he was like, oh my God. And I was just stunned, because it's like, this is ridiculous. And Prince earlier in the year, 2016 was just one crapadoodles year. That's no way around it. And indeed, You Want It Darker. It's just one of those albums that I think of in the fall of 2016. It was crappy, but this album, again, still brought levity in just that it was so good, especially the production. Some of his later albums, I wish the production had been tweaked a little bit, maybe a little warmer. The production on You Want It Darker is fantastic. And of course, last year, Thanks for the Dance, an album he started recording, or from bits he was recording before he suddenly died. Because even though he was getting ill, my understanding was his death was not expected. It was a fall and complications from that. So thank you, Leonard, for all this incredible work that people will enjoy for many years to come. Well, that concludes my introductory set of 5 episodes revisiting 5 concert highlights from my first 5 decades of concert going. With episode 7, I go back to the beginning of the story and pick up where I left off following my first show, Roxy Music, in 1975, which composed episode 2 of this series. The story skips ahead to 1978, marking my permanent, ongoing concert-going life from then till now, and encompassing 2 shows from that year that each in their own way symbolize a major shift in my listening that was cemented during 1978 after years of percolation, as it were. With episode 7, I'm going to be looking more at what I was leaving behind, with concert number 002, still the same, Bob Seger and the Silver Bullet Band with Toby Bowe at the London Gardens, London, Ontario, Canada, Friday, May 19th, 1978. Meanwhile, episode 8, the other show I saw that year, points to where everything was clearly going, had been going, and now this is where it was going to go. With concert number 3, this year's model, Elvis Costello with the Battered Wives at Alumni Hall, UWO, London, Ontario, Canada, November 6th, 1978. So, tune in next time to episode 7 for imbibing masses, gesticulating specs, and wanting completely different. Thanks again for listening to the MyLifeInConcert.com podcast series. Once again, I'm your host, Various Artists, reminding you to like, follow, and subscribe to us on Facebook and Instagram, and check out our YouTube channel. You can also visit the original blog entry and lots of other older blog entries on the MyLifeInConcert.com website, where you can also hear the podcasts. Tune in next time and we'll meet up for the show. Bye for now.